How's it going? I'm Derrick Martin. I'm a brand ambassador for Notch. I also do the field testing and R&D. I just want to share some of my experiences with the Vertec and the Bollard versus the Vertec with the Aeris Pulley. I've been on both devices for over a year now, and I've found that they function very differently. And I kind of want to just really dive in deep with some of the questions I've gotten back from trade shows and online, and sort of just show you the differences between the two devices and how they actually are functioning very differently from one another. All right, I have both set up here. The orange one, we have the Rope Runner Vertec, and this comes standard with the friction plate and the Bollard here. Some of the features with it is we got rid of the slick pins, so it's push button opening and a toolless adjustment for the top cam. The standard Vertec will come with a Bollard, and then we have the Aeris Pulley Kit edition. This again has the button opening, no more slick pins, the same toolless adjustment in the top cam. What will be replaced is this lower friction plate and pulley. The friction plate is slightly different in the fact that it has a baby bump incorporated into it to increase a little bit more friction, and then the pulley allows for greater tending. So slight differences, but they function very differently. The Bollard creates more friction, a constant friction that's always in the system to create a greater control when making large movements in the tree, especially in descent. The pulley gives a greater experience with tending, but they function very differently in the way I run them in a work environment. I talk about the Vertec being the production. Anybody can run this. It runs great. It gets me all my work done. Where the pulley version is a little bit more of a higher end, you still have to really dial it in. It's for those that really want the highest performance when it comes to tending, where you might see that at a comp scene or something like that. So I've often referred to the Vertec as my production device and the pulley as my comp device. So my understanding of the Rope Runner and how it came about, it was designed to give the highest end SRT experience, from tending to control and swings, to be the ultimate comp device essentially for SRT. And the Rope Runner did an excellent job at that, but there wasn't that device that anybody could just jump on. So there was a need for a device that was a little bit simpler and gave the same overall great experience. And that's, I think, what we designed perfectly in the Vertec. I kind of compared it to like race cars. Almost all development happens at the racing level. It's the highest end. So that's where you start. And that's where the Rope Runner Pro was. It was our highest end SRT experience. But we're not all driving race cars. And I think there was always this need for a production run, something that anybody could just jump on, plug and play, grab whatever rope, and have a very high-end climbing experience every day, in and out, get the same experience with. And I think that's what we get out of the Vertec. So I want to go into more detail about the Rope Runner Vertec. I have set up here a rope wrench system. I want to show how I sort of changed my mentality about the Vertec with the Bollard, and how I've started to consider it much more similar to a mechanical rope wrench versus comparing it to the Rope Runner Pro or the Aeris Pulley version. So what do I mean by that? The Bollard here creates a consistent amount of friction in the system. We get added friction lower in the system that can give a greater performance in making swings. So I was on a rope wrench for many years before the Rope Runner came out, and I loved it. I loved the way it functioned, but I noticed that I ran them very differently from one another. From that experience, I started to realize how I can run the Vertec differently to get a higher experience out of it as well. So let's dive into this just a little bit further. When a rope wrench engages, it takes a consistent bite. So at all times, this bends in the rope and it has a consistent amount of friction in the system. When I was running a rope wrench, I ran it a little bit differently in that I could open my hitch the whole way up, feel this amount of friction in my system, whether I was making a big swing or running a limb, and then I could back off on the hitch to create the control that I need to make a smooth landing or have the control that I need as I ran a limb. So in the same way, the Vertec has a consistent amount of friction from this Bollard lower in the system. While the rope wrench creates it above your hitch, this one creates it lower than our release point, which would be the bird. Thinking about it like a rope wrench in that I have a consistent amount of friction always in my system, I'm going to open this up a lot further and then back it off to create the control that I need to create a smooth landing or the control I need in running a long limb walk. Now, there is added friction when it comes to tending, so I will tend just slightly differently. If we're tending directly away right into that bollard, we're gonna experience the most amount of friction. If when I'm coming back in from a limb, I can pull in a straight down or just slightly out, I'm not pulling into that bollard as much, so then I'm not gonna experience as much friction. These are some of the little things we can do when we understand the system to make it work the best for us. This is my go-to device now every day at work because I really have enjoyed the added friction down here in my system to give me that maximum amount of control when working, when making swings. And that's always in there. So it's very easy for me to run this device on a larger range of ropes. Because there is a constant friction in the system, now I'm not so relying on hitting that sweet spot in the release to get the high performance that I want. Instead, I can open it up, find the setting that I want for each rope. When I'm at work, I might use 3 different ropes for 3 different climbs throughout the day. And I can quickly and easily take this Vertec, adjust it appropriately, and get the same amount of performance by opening it up and backing it off for that control when I make swings and limb walk, just like I had when I was running the rope wrench. All right, so here I have set up the Rope Runner Pro and the Rope Runner Vertec with the Aeris Pulley Kit attached to it. So let's go over some of the differences between the two and the similarities between the two. Differences between the two: the Rope Runner Pro had slick pins. It also required an Allen wrench to adjust the tool here. It had the pulley for a real optimal tending experience and fair lead experience. Here we have the Rope Runner Vertec. Instead of slick pins, now we have button opening, nothing to potentially drop when taking the device on and off, specifically when up in the tree. We have gone to a toolless adjustment, which is very nice for swapping it out from one climber to another, or from one rope to another, or when the weather conditions are slightly different, whether it's rain or sap that you're experiencing during your climb. Another difference down here, if I go ahead and open this, is that the friction plate has this little baby bump in to create a little bit greater friction off of the Rope Runner Pro. What that does, in my experience, as a bigger climber, there was occasionally a little bit of a break that had to happen to find the sweet spot. And depending on the rope size you're using or construction you're using, it could be a little bit difficult to get that release before you got into the sweet spot of the Rope Runner Pro to get that optimal performance and control when making the swing. By adding that little baby bump into the friction plate down here, incorporated with the pulley, we have a little bit of added friction lower in the device, which gives it a greater range of sweet spot, and you don't have that subtle break to release the device to find that optimal performance and optimal control. Climbers that were already using the Pro and had a great performance with that, when I gave them this, some of the first feedback I would get is that they don't have to break that it's really easy to get into that sweet spot to get the control that they're looking for. Now, I do want to also touch, when I worked with the Rope Runner Pro, because it needed an Allen wrench to adjust, I married this to the rope. So I'd find a rope that I liked, that worked well with this device, and I wouldn't change it out. I had multiple Rope Runner Pros for multiple ropes. Now we have the toolless adjustment, but I've found in my experience when testing this device that I still end up marrying it to a rope. And the reason being is that different size diameters or different constructions, whether it's static and it's really hard to take a bend, or if it's really soft like a 24-strand arborist rope that knots very easily, that's going to give you different performances and different experiences. So even though this has a toolless adjustment, it makes it easy to adjust on the fly, I still found that I was marrying this to a rope because the sweet spot was different for each individual rope. It is something that you really have to dial in and get a true feel for to get the optimal experience. So I would still find my preferred rope and then marry it to the Aeris Pulley version of this so that I could get the optimal experience of finding that release to get the most control in my swings and when limb walking. All right, I have both the Vertex set up here and the Vertec with the Aeris Pulley Kit installed. I want to go through really in depth between the two devices, how I look at them, how I use them differently, and just the experience that I've had. I got to do the field testing for both devices, so I've been on the Vertec for about 2 years now, and the Aeris Pulley version for over a year as well. And with that experience, I've come to notice some very drastic differences. And I'll tell you right now that after spending time on both devices at work, I pick up the Vertec 90% of the time. It's my go-to device. And I want to go through a little bit of why that is my preferred device over the Pulley version that we're a little bit more familiar with coming from the Rope Runner Pro. The Rope Runner Vertec is not directly related to the Rope Runner Pro. It has a lot of similarities, but it's very different in the way it functions. It took for me starting to call it a mechanical rope wrench system that I really started to change the way I thought about the device and the way I ran the device as well. So let's look at the differences. So the main differences is that the Vertec has a bollard, where the Pulley Kit has a baby bump on the friction plate and a pulley. So immediate differences that a lot of people picked up on is that there is some friction in tending. But that being said, there's also added friction in descent. That bollard creates a consistent amount of friction that's always in the system. Just like with a rope wrench, always creating a consistent bite above our system. It had that consistent friction, and I learned how to control that by opening it all the way up and backing it out for control. And that's how I run the Vertec as well. I am able to go fully wide open in big swings, and then as I need control to back off on it, rely on that friction to be there to create the control to have a smooth landing or a smooth limb out the limb walk. Whereas when I'm running the Pulley version, whether it be the Pro or the Aeris Pulley Kit on this, there is a sweet spot. If you go wide open, it's almost beyond the point of coming back for a larger guy like myself. And then I have to add hand control or something to create friction. I got to brake with my thumb to be able to come back. And because of that, I found a higher performance with that added friction, where I feel like I'm much more in control during my big swings or long limb walks. Another reason why I end up choosing the Vertec at work is because I like to play with different ropes. I like to play with my system a little bit. I'm constantly changing it. And with the Vertec having extra friction lower in the system, I'm able to do that. So now that we've gone in depth on how the bollard creates more friction and a consistent amount of friction in the system, whereas the pulley with the little baby bump does create slightly more, but there isn't nearly as much friction lower in the system as there is this. I want to just show you how I run them slightly differently, and then how I tend slightly different with each one, since one has a pulley and one does not. The Vertec, which is really my go-to device now, I use it at work almost all the time. It gives me a greater sense of control in the swings. So the way I run this differently versus the Rope Runner Pro or the Aeris Pulley Kit, when I go to make a swing, when we sit into this bollard creates a pinch point down here, creating a consistent amount of friction. So I can open this wide open as I go to make my swing, and then release it to create the control that I want to get a smooth landing or a really smooth limb walk as I'm running out a limb. Now, knowing that there's no pulley down here, it will change the way I come in from a limb just slightly. Where you'll notice the biggest difference between having a bollard versus a pulley is when you do a long limb walk and you're dragging tail. Because there's no pulley to fair lead it in it, you're experiencing both friction as you're dragging the rope out and as the rope's feeding through the device. So in that situation, knowing that, if I want to have the optimal amount of control, I'm just going to pre-lay out rope so that I can make my full swing or run out the limb and have a consistent amount of friction where I'm not dragging the tail of my rope along with me. So as I come back in from that limb walk, I'm going to change just a little bit of how I tend. Instead of tending out where you're pulling right into that bollard and experiencing the most amount of friction, I'll instead be pulling more straight down. If it's a fairly stout limb that I can just walk right back in, I'm actually going to just hold the bottom of the device as I pull rope right through, staying nice and stable, taking that slack out of my system at all times, and really you're not going to experience much friction at all because the bollard's going to fully release as you're pulling straight down. I noticed that I'll just put a light forward motion, but not nearly as drastic as lifting the whole device where you're going to feel the most amount of friction. Really, the only time I do that is right before I sit into it to take out all that slack. But that's really the only time I'm pulling directly into that bollard. And that gives me a better pending experience even with the Vertec there. So now, as I look at the pulley version with the baby bump adds a little bit of friction to make the release a little bit smoother than I experienced with the Rope Runner Pro. So it does give me a greater experience than the Rope Runner Pro just in that alone. But the way I run this is just finding that breaking point, which I call my sweet spot. I gotta find that sweet spot in the swing. And different ropes are gonna have a different size of sweet spot or a different point. So again, I'm often gonna marry this to the rope, but the way I run this is just breaking it, finding that sweet spot, and then staying in that to get the control that I want. Now with the pulley here, I don't feel like I have to tend my rope down nearly as much. Sometimes I don't actually mind that friction as I'm running out because I can collapse the device more on a long, real flat horizontal limb that's closer to my anchor point. That added friction of it having to fair lead in allows me to open it up further into that sweet spot instead of just right at the beginning of it. And so that's part of like having to get that feel for the device with a rope to get that optimal performance. But for me, because I like to switch it up constantly, I can get that same kind of experience with the Vertec, and that's why I choose that one most times at work. So if you've already got the Vertec and you're looking to add the pulley kit, or you don't have either one and you were already anticipating and waiting for the pulley version to come out, what are you getting by buying the Rope Runner Vertec and then the pulley kit add-on? So because I find that they run so differently, you're really almost getting two separate devices. The way I look at it is we've got our production device, or at least this is how it's worked for me, and then we have our comp device. So by buying the Vertec and then buying the pulley kit, you're not getting an upgrade. You're getting two separate devices that you can find out what works best for you. Because I found the experience so different between the two, it allowed me to really go back and forth and really dial in which one I felt suited my climbing style best. And having it as just a kit add-on meant I didn't have to spend the money on two full devices. I could get one and then change it so that I could get two totally different experiences through one device. So I hope this information that I've given you shows you the differences between the two devices and how they function differently and which one will best suit your climbing style and the functions that you're looking to get out of your climbing device.